Welcome to Candoor, where candid conversations open career doors. I'm your host, Christina Hu, and today we'll be having a candid conversation with Wadood or Wadood Daoud. Wadood Daoud is a senior product manager at Microsoft and previously spent time at Tesla and the U.S. Department of Energy. He graduated from Iowa State University with a bachelor's in engineering and was also heavily involved with the National Society of Black Engineers, where he served as the National Finance Chair, focused on building symbiotic partnerships. Through his experiences in NISB and the technology industry, he has seen how critical it is to be given a chance. And he co-founded Candoor because he wanted to give as many people as possible the same chance he was given. Regardless of the goal, he truly believes that anything can be achieved with the right mix of knowledge, networking, and confidence. Wadood, it is a pleasure to have you today.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. Tell us a bit more about yourself. Who is Wadood and how did you get to where you are today?
Who is Wadood? Okay, so my story starts in Iowa City, Iowa, but it probably starts a little bit earlier than that. My dad and mom are Sudanese. They had ended up coming to America about six-ish months before I was born. I was born in Alexandria, Virginia, and then when I was 7 months old, we moved to Iowa City, Iowa. To this day, nobody's given me a straight answer on like why, but that's a totally different question. I ended up kind of just being somebody in Iowa City, Iowa. I got to be like what I called the middleman quite often, whether it was helping my dad at the grocery store talk to some people who spoke really good English, or being at, high school and making sure that my younger siblings were able to understand the nuances of America. What that resulted in is me just being a people person. Like I was always exposed to conversations, et cetera. And so I think that's really like a big thing about myself is I love people. I love being able to bridge the gap between individuals who can't help communicate between each other. I ended up going to Iowa State University after high school, studied mechanical engineering. And around my sophomore year, I realized like mechanical engineering just wasn't going to be it. So I pivoted to kind of just focusing on the technology industry more broadly. I love technology. I love how it can help people and like really break down barriers across the planet. So yeah, I would say I'm a Sudanese American, born in Iowa, technologist, love people, and also Candoor is one of those things that really holds a special place in my heart. Just because I look at my story, whether it be coming to America or getting my first job at Microsoft, is just being about a chance, being about somebody seeing a little bit more in me than maybe the rest of the world did, or seeing more in my dad than the rest of the world did. And so I'm blessed for that. I hope that helps, Christina.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. What an amazing background and story you have. And I'm also the daughter of immigrants too. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about that and what it means to be, an immigrant or this concept of an American dream. So what does that American dream mean to you? And is that Wadood's dream? Is that a different one? Tell us a bit more about what it's like coming from that background.
Yeah. My Uber narrative I'll bring about the American dream from a like non-American perspective is it's a bunch of shenanigans, and I'll break that apart. The American dream, I feel like, is pitched to individuals from outside America as this thing where you come to America, you work hard, the output of hard work in America equals success. But I think people like me and you realize pretty early on in America that like there's a pretty robust system at play, in the sense of like how important communication is, how important networks are. And so for me, I actually look at the American dream as something that while it's sold to, this first generation, like our parents collectively, the reality is I think the American dream is a second generational dream. I think that our parents kind of knew that maybe they weren't going to be able to accomplish everything that they wanted to out of America, but instead they could set us up to be able to accomplish anything and everything. And so when I think of the American dream, I think I'm kind of living it. Like I think I'm the living proof of, hey, maybe hard work doesn't pay off, but raising a child in America does end up opening doors that you wouldn't have had otherwise. I have cousins that currently make in 1 month what I would make in 1 hour of work. And it's not because they're any less qualified than me. It's just that in America, like when you really do figure out the system and understand the nuance, you really can change the world. So I think American dream equals shenanigans. If you're selling it as just hard work equals output. But it is something special when you think about what can happen when you have 1 generation, 2 generations, 3 generations in America, because you start to like understand the real system at play, the real inequities. And then like, myself and you also, like, I think we found ways to kind of navigate those inequities.
Absolutely. And would love to kind of tie it to your career and your journey now. All those concepts you mentioned about networking and the importance of being given a chance. What are some of the challenges you've had to overcome in your career so far? Walk us through that journey to how you got to where you are.
Mm. I mean, so many, right? Like before even getting to college, I ended up living basically, I lived in Section 8 housing, and our Section 8 housing neighborhood was like surrounded by some of the richest homes in the Iowa City area. And what that resulted in is me basically being plopped in a high school with like some very affluent individuals. The reality is, like, I didn't have anybody in my life in high school to help me with the college application. I applied to one school, and it was because I applied to it. It was because I, at one time, thought I was going to go to University of Michigan because I thought it looked cool on TV, and I looked online and saw it was $50,000 of annual tuition and just never applied. The reality is, like, I think some people who come from a different background wouldn't have closed that door. And I think I'm very proud and happy of how my story ended up. But like, that's just one example of, like, for me, I didn't have somebody to say, like, this is the college application process. This is what you do. All I knew is that my dad was requiring that I went to college and I had to figure it out. Another example is like youth sports. Like, there's great examples of how important it is to be connected with people through kind of your athletic involvement. And for me, like, my parents weren't able to pay for any of that, so I was one of the kids who like literally was forging my dad's signature trying to get on a soccer team, where some of my peers were the ones who, like, not only were they on the team, they had like a support system around them. And then, like, all that kind of adds up, right? Like, you come to college with no person who can help you with a resume, no person who told you what was the right major, nobody, just besides a dad saying you have to go to college. I think that resulted in me kind of just having like an unfair maybe disadvantage coming into college. But what really changed that or really transformed my life was people. Like at Iowa State University, where I went to college, I really quickly like built a network of people like me, who looked like me, who talked like me, who had similar lives as my own. And through that network and through that community, we kind of started to share different pieces of it. So one example is one of my first resumes that got me an internship was actually like almost from a template standpoint, a copy paste from one of my other friends whose also parents were first generation who had just landed an internship. Or some of my first mentors were people who like were once again connected to my network. So I think there were a lot of different challenges that I faced to kind of get to where I'm at in my career, but it all boiled down to the world wasn't fair, and I had to lean on people that were outside of my like immediate network that I was born with to help me along the way. Trying to think of anything else that's interesting. I mean, like, a tidbit of a story is, for my internship at Tesla, I had sent 150 LinkedIn messages. Like, I was motivated, right? I had everything that I felt I needed to be a good fit for this role. And two people responded to my messages. And like, that was a big challenge for me, right? Like, somebody who's willing to send 150 messages and willing to take the classes and getting good grades. I think I had like a 3.8 at that time, but like, no one gave me the light of day. Well, I would go to the career fair and hear about one of my friends who had like a 2.5 GPA, whose mom worked at a company, and what do you know? They now have an internship. So I think I unfortunately like got to see how unfair things were through my struggles, but it only motivated me more, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I kind of want to unpack that sort of moment where you realize, like, man, need to get someone on the inside, and folks giving you a chance to really get seen. How did you first learn about the concept of networking? Like for me, like when I heard about that in college, I was like, ew, like what is that? Like why do this feels like really transactional? How did you gain the confidence to do that outreach and sort of learn how to navigate the sort of unspoken rules of corporate America through that process?
Yeah. I think in hindsight, and I think people who know me well will know this, but like, when I say people person, like, I really mean it. Like, in hindsight, probably when I was 12 years old and I was put into a situation of like making sure that my family could get food stamps by being on the phone with like the Department of Human Services, like, that's not really like a 12 to 14-year-old's job. But for me, like, I got put into that fire pretty early. And so I think I was like, I think by the time I came to college, I was comfortable with like human contact. Like, I was comfortable with reaching out to people. I didn't call it networking. It was more of like, we survived in America by people helping us. Like, we survived by people showing us where the free food was. We survived by people showing us how to get affordable housing. And so networking was never like this career oriented thing for me. It was like, you need something and people have it, and there's somebody that can help. Like, we literally survived off of America helping us in different ways. So I think the epiphany I had to answer your question was my sophomore year, when I went to the career fair and realized that every single sophomore mechanical engineering student had taken the exact same classes. Like, how Iowa State was basically, it was like your freshman year, it was general education stuff. Your second year was like more specific ME stuff, but like there was no classes that you got to choose. And so I went to the career fair realizing, like, how is my piece of paper that I'm going to these companies like saying that they should hire me is any different from anyone else who went to the same school as me? And that was like a scary realization, because like my dreams were so big. Like my dreams were six figures, starting a company, helping thousands of people, but my resume was the same as every other student in my class. And so that's when I think I pivoted to being like, okay, I need to find ways to make my resume different. And the only people who know that were like the people whose resumes were different. How did you get to Tesla? How did you get to X, Y, and Z location? So for me, it wasn't networking out of like a desire. It was like networking out of a need. Cause like I think maybe my response to like not knowing an answer was like, okay, well, somebody knows it. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise, right? Like me being young and having to be thrown into those rooms. But what it resulted in is after my sophomore year, like my friends used to joke is like I was a savage on LinkedIn. Like I literally, if somebody had some information that I felt like I needed, they were going to get a mail from me. I literally just got an email last week or 2 weeks ago, a LinkedIn message from a person named Jigger Shah, who's on Joe Biden's like something team, something around the energy industry. And he had like responded to a message from like 3 years ago. And he was like, hey, thanks for the message. And I realized like, what was I doing? Like, why did I think I could send this dude who was clearly way busier than he needed to do a message? But at the time, my sophomore year, like it wasn't networking. It was people who have the answers I need, and I'm just going to ask them.
Totally. And I think one of the biggest lessons from that is you never know until you ask, right? And the worst thing that happens is someone ignores you or they say no. But if you never ask, maybe it could be a yes, right?
And
let's take it to the oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, just because this is an important little like insight that I'd have that I'd want to leave people with. I am like at 95% success rate for if somebody responds to a meeting request or a message and I say like, can we get a virtual coffee or can we get a coffee? I'm like 95% successful with that. So like if you can get a response from somebody on LinkedIn, on anywhere, and like your second message is like, hey, let's grab some tea, let's grab some coffee or something. I don't know. People like can't say no to some coffee. I don't know why. It might take 3-6 months, but like it works.
Awesome. That's really great. And I want to get to some more of your words of wisdom at the end of this, but I'm also dying to know, what it's like to walk a day in your shoes. So you're a senior product manager at Microsoft. Like, take us through a day in your life. Like, what does a typical workday look like for you?
No, I love these questions because it makes me like reflect on all of this is coming back to the start of like being a people centric person in my life, but like the essence of product management. And before I was a senior product manager, I was a program manager. But the reality is for both of those roles, it comes down to communication. So I'm gonna give you like a real day in the life, and this will be like super relevant. I'll wake up. Most of my team is either in Seattle or they're in Suzhou, China. I work with a few folks that are also in Norway. I wake up. I'm usually going through my emails just to make sure there's nothing on fire. My role focuses on 50% of my job is on sustainability. How can we be more carbon efficient? And then the second half of my role is all about experiences. So I'll wake up, check my email to see if there's anything on the carbon front or on the experiences front that's a red flag. Otherwise, I'll usually spend 30 minutes. This is an incredible example here. Every day I like to write down one thing that I'm thankful for. I write down the date. I write down what's top of mind for me. And then I write down my to-do list. Sometimes my top of mind is my to-do list and sometimes it's not. But the reason I do that, it's like really organized, like what am I actually going to do today? After I've gone through that process and my emails are done, I usually have probably anywhere between 3 and 5 meetings on my calendar. Let's say half of those meetings are usually what we like to call like feature crew syncs. So it'll be myself, maybe an engineering manager, a few engineers, and we just basically talk about what happened in the last week. What did we commit to? Has it landed? Has it not landed? Is there any big risks? Is there anything that's blocking the engineering team? My other 2 meetings might be more focused on strategy, where, for example, one of the things I'm working on is a new view that we're creating to understand the experiences that our customers are experiencing. And in that meeting, it'll be much more like collaborative. After that, I'll probably go back to emails to make sure I'm sending follow-ups. One of the big roles as a product manager is also to make sure that everybody understands where we're going. And so I'll usually close out all these meetings with does everybody have a good understanding? Is there any way that I can be more helpful, et cetera, et cetera? Outside of the meetings, I'm probably spending a decent amount of my time thinking. It might seem unintuitive, but like dedicated time to brainstorm, to think is so important for a product or program manager because we work with engineers, but those engineers have a lot of work to do. They're writing code, they're doing pull requests, they're fixing bugs. So me as a product manager, I need to be the one to zoom out and say, well, what are our customers saying? What do our customers need? And on every 6-month basis, we kind of go through that planning process. So that's genuinely a day of my life, waking up, emails, making sure I'm organizing my thoughts, going into meetings focused on engineering for specific projects, but also focused on what are we going to do moving forward. And then I'll usually close out by just making sure I'm sending more emails to keep people in the loop. The only time a fire might happen is when there's like a customer escalation. So when a customer escalates something, my day is totally different because then it's all about like, okay, what do we do to fix this problem? Outside of that, I make sure I go on walks with my wife and our puppy. I make sure that I try to call family as much as possible. But the reality is, like, I really do love what I'm able to do through everything that I'm involved with because it really just leverages what I feel like is one of my best skills, which is communication. And so I implore, like, anybody who's interested in product or program management, if you feel like communication is something that you're really comfortable with, I'm really confident in someone's abilities to then be able to excel in this type of role. Is that helpful?
That's a great overview. And I'm hearing a couple of themes kind of come through. One is the importance of communication, sometimes even over communication, stakeholder management. The product manager is kind of a touch point between all these different teams. And then also keeping the eye on the ball, right? Making sure the team doesn't get distracted and really put themselves in the customer's shoes. And a lot of that comes through your role as that central coordinating voice and figure there as well. Tell me, what's the best part of your job and the worst part about your job? No sugarcoating, like, yeah.
Ooh. Okay, best part's easy. It's that, like, every single thing, and this takes some time, right? Like I'm like 3 years into my career. Every single project I'm working on came from my brain. And I'm so blessed for that, right? Like every single project I'm working on came from me seeing a problem or talking to somebody at a problem and then talking with 20 other people and saying, like, should we do it? Like, should we do it? Okay, let's do it. And so that's my favorite thing, is like really being able to go from what you think, getting people excited about what you think, and then getting people behind you. Least favorite part is probably honestly like I don't want to call it like rhythm of business, the auxiliary pieces of the puzzle, right? And you kind of alluded to it, like keeping your eye on the ball, that takes a lot of work, right? Like that takes a lot of like emails and a lot of like tracking bugs and a lot of tracking what engineering teams are doing. And so I think like honestly just like the process side of things and making sure that every single little detail happens. One of my best areas of improvement is probably like being more and more detail oriented. And it's not that I don't like details, but like I like being in a room, talking to people, solving problems. And so I don't enjoy as much like spending an hour like, okay, like let me make sure this is documented correctly and that we have the right date and this and that. But all of them are so important. And I think it's like, even though I'm saying it's my least favorite part, I wouldn't trade it because it's so important to the job. You know what I mean? Like it makes my engineers' lives better, et cetera. And so it's a negative, but like a false negative, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. One product manager once described the role to me as, you're not the one building the train that's getting to the destination. You're laying the tracks, sweeping the dirt off, and making sure the coast is clear so that your team can build the train and make sure that they're headed in the right direction. And a lot of that process, not dropping balls, like it is a really, really big job. And I'm so glad that you said that, because I think that's one of the maybe slightly unsexier parts of PM, but is really, really helpful to ensuring your team can sort of stay focused and resourced on the way there. Tell me.
Yep. And I will say too, because I love how you said that train analogy. I've never heard that. I think that might actually be my favorite part about, like, that might be my new favorite, is that as a product or program manager, like if you do the work on the front end, you can really see a project, like you're saying, just move. So I think it's really cool to like, that is my favorite thing. Being able to lay the tracks, I think, is probably the best thing that I like about being a product manager.
One thing I wanted to ask about your first answer, which is the best part around influencing people. We commonly hear that a PM's role is to really influence without authority. And that can be really hard to do when your engineers report to other people, your designers have other things they're working on. Like, how do you actually influence without authority, especially if you're like new to a team or a company? Like, what tips do you have for someone who might be, I don't know, first 30 days just starting out?
Yeah. The reality is it doesn't start with the influence. I think that's the biggest advice I'd give them, is like, don't come into a role thinking like influence is what you're going to do from day one. I literally, like, I spend so much, and I have spent so much of my time on getting to know the person. What's the point of working on a team with somebody if all you're going to talk about is engineering? Like, one of my favorite engineers I work with, his name is Vlad. He is a woodworker, and I've looked through his website and like even contemplated like buying multiple thousands of dollars of woodwork equipment from him just to like show him how much I appreciate him. Or another one of the engineers that I work with is passionate about beer, honestly, and he just like is always looking for new different things to try, and like me and him bond over that. So I think the first step in influence without authority is the person, like learning who they are. Because when you have a human that trusts you and that you trust, it's no longer influencing them, right? Like it's more of a conversation. Like none of the projects that I'm working on was, hey, I need you to do this. It was like, this is a big problem. Our customers see it. Do you see it? And if they see it, then yeah, like we end up working together on the problem. So I think that's the biggest advice I'd give people is like, influence without authority isn't going to start on your first day. And it's probably not going to start on your first 3 months. It's going to start after you built these relationships with your team so that you can have real honest conversations with them and like get them behind your projects. And now like I'm so blessed to have a team that trusts me. Like I used to come with crazy ideas. And the fact that the engineering team used to be able to say like, well, dude, you're crazy. Like there's no way. That's a luxury. And if you haven't built those types of relationships, maybe people won't be comfortable telling you the real deal. And you invest in a project that ends up not actually going all the way. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I love that. I wish you could say it louder for the people in the back, but the reality is that you said is that there's a person right behind each one of these, stakeholders on your team. And a lot of times, and I feel this too, like when you're like super ambitious and you want to hit the ground running, the desire is to like get stuff done from day one. But building relationships takes time. And something I found helpful in my career too is just get a one-on-one coffee, as you said, with every seat that touches your seat, because you never know, if you can help them with their goals and how they might be able to help you with yours, and just create a great relationship inside and outside of work. So that is fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. This is a topic that comes up, again and again. Have you ever faced imposter syndrome? And if so, how have you navigated that in your career?
I still face imposter syndrome. Like I'm still not comfortable, and this is why Candoor like has such a special spot in my heart. Like I'm not comfortable with how unfair it feels the world is, right? Like you come into these rooms, right? Like as a product or program manager at Microsoft, like there's not that many people that look like me. And like whether it's the truth or not, you start to like question like, well, how did I get here? Yeah, like why did I get here? Like what was the special thing? And so I think imposter syndrome is, I want to say natural. I think for me, I deal with it quite a bit. But what brings me back, like to ground level, is that I've been doing the work, right? Like it's so easy for us to get into our own heads, but like why not spend some time to understand everybody else's head and everybody else's perspective? And so I think when I end up like really feeling imposter syndrome or just be like looking at a project and I'm like, it's just not making the progress that I wanted it to make, I usually reach out to like some of my champions, on the inside, like whether they're teammates or they're in different organizations or whatever. And I'll just be like, listen, this is what I'm dealing with. Have you dealt with it, et cetera, et cetera. And what I find 99% of the time is we're just in our own head. Like what I find is like imposter syndrome is one of those things that society unfortunately has like made a reality, but we're also like the individual experiencing imposter syndrome is one of the best able to be able to like rectify that and change their perspective. So I don't see imposter syndrome leaving me, honestly. Like in 10 years, I feel like if you ask me will I experience imposter syndrome, I'll say yeah. But the reality is I have people around me in my life who like are willing to kind of build me up, because sometimes imposter syndrome is just a lack of confidence. And if you don't have people around you that look like you that will give you that confidence, you can kind of end up getting into your own head. So I hope that's somewhat helpful, but like, yeah.
Absolutely. I think the getting in your own head is something that we all struggle with, but I really like you bringing it back to the work that we can do and continuing to push forward. My final question for you before we wrap up is, knowing everything that you know now, what advice would you give to your younger self or those just starting out in their careers?
I think I would say dream. And this sounds so fuzzy, but like I'll unpack this a little bit. The biggest reason that I was able to land an internship at Tesla and work at the Department of Energy and inevitably end up at Microsoft, I personally don't think was because of like just my communication skills or just because of any other reason. It was because my dreams were so big. Like by my sophomore year in college, I wanted to start a company and be retired by the time I was 25 or 30 years old. And like the reality is I didn't accomplish those things, but I landed halfway there, right? Or I landed 10% of the way there, whatever you want to call it. And so my advice is dream, because so much of it is possible. Like so much of what you dream is possible, and find some champions that'll help you along the way. Like I had so many people in my network who like when I dreamed didn't shut them down. Like they're like, you can do it, run with it. And so if you can dream, like I'm so confident that everything else will find its way. You're going to meet people along the way who resonate with your dreams. You're going to be so motivated to go and send 150 messages or 200 messages or 1,000 messages, because it's all possible. If you're told me that you're 15 years old today and you want to be a CEO of insert company name here, like you can do it. But the only thing that will limit you is your dreams.
Mm-hmm. I love that final word of advice that you gave. Wadood, it has been such a pleasure to have you on this episode of Candid Conversations. Thank you again for joining us. Thanks. And thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Candid Conversations. If you're a college student or recent grad from an underserved background and interested in connecting with Wadood one-on-one, apply at www.candoor.io to join our platform as an advisee. And if you're an industry professional who shares our mission to democratize access to transformative careers, we'd love to have you join Candoor as an advisor. Until next time, take care.